Ragnar Lothbrok lies dead in the Northumbrian dirt. Veins choked with Anglo-Saxon wrath and viper's venom.
Back in 2017, Creative Assembly made an announcement which would come to change the Total War series forever. On the official Total War website, a blog post was made detailing the creation of a new type of Total War game, namely a Total War Saga. These games were meant to be reminiscent of the regular historical games, but take place in localized regions and over less time. Or as CA put it, Saga games will be standalone spin-off titles focusing on exciting pivotal moments in history, rather than whole historical eras. I have to admit it, back in 2017, I liked the idea of such a concept. I'm ever the optimist, and in a time when Warhammer was all CA had on their horizon, Saga titles that could make the wait for the next major historical installment seem like a good idea, especially considering the fact that in the same blog post, CA said that historical games formed the majority of our forthcoming releases. Well, now it's 5 years later, and the only game one could possibly call historical since 2017 is 3K, but even this is a much more mythological than historical title. So what happened to the Saga titles? Those games that were supposed to be the powder kegs of history? Well, let's take a look at them, shall we? The prologue to all of this is of course that in a rather unsympathetic move, Fall of the Samurai was retroactively made into a Saga title, without any new real improvements or updates. But the first real Saga title was of course Thrones of Britannia, arguably Total War's most uninteresting game ever made. Thrones aimed to provide an intense game of Vikings and Saxons, taking place in the 9th century and only on the British Isles. In my review of the game, I said it was boring and uninspired, even though it offers some cool management mechanics that sadly do not live up to their potential. The next, and only other Saga title since the announcement, is Troy. Now Troy is a special case, because even though it was somewhat lackluster at launch, Troy offered a vastly updated engine, performance, UI, and new exciting gameplay mechanics. With the Mythos update which came a year later, Troy was made even better. But here's the thing, Saga titles were stated as being first and foremost historical games. Now the issue with Thrones was that it mostly sucked. The issue with Troy, on the other hand, is that it's a mythological game, and even though it takes place in Greece and Anatolia, it might as well not have, since there are virtually no societal or historical mechanics to speak of in the traditional sense, perhaps other than the new economy system. Now I loved Troy for both what it was and what it became, as I feel like it offers some unique mechanics and an overall vibe that no other Total War provides. But here's another issue encountering the Saga titles. So far, they're either too boring, too non-historical, or in the case of Troy, even though the overall experience is good, they're just too small. Creative Assembly proved that they could make a major update to the game with the Mythos expansion, but they stopped just short of absolute greatness. An update for Troy that included Egypt and Mesopotamia, in a true mythological Bronze Age Total War, could have made Troy into a legendary Total War game. But that's just not the nature of the Saga game, at least not thus far. Now, I understand that Saga games have their limitations, however arbitrary they may be. A region-based Total War is region-based by nature after all, but limiting Saga games eternally is in my opinion a bad choice. Due to the Troy release promotion on Epic where the game was free, Troy is likely one of the best-selling Total War games of all time. If CA wanted to, of course it could have made Troy larger than what it began as. Expanding Troy would have showed that CA dared to stick with their games for longer than just a year, but they've done that with only 2 other games, namely Rome 2 and Warhammer 2. This reveals a bad pattern in CA's game development. Contrary to companies like Paradox, CA doesn't seem to have figured out how they wish to relate to their games. They seem to support their games sporadically, picking up development of Rome 2 expansions after like 4 years of silence, and giving their other games only 1 year's worth of DLC. And because of this, because Thrones of Britannia was so uninspired, and because Troy wasn't expanded upon further, I get the feeling that Saga titles thus far have been overall disappointments. Especially is this the case because the promise of a bigger, massive historical game like the ones of the past has not come to fruition at all. This is why I believe the Total War Saga concept needs to die. It takes valuable manpower away from bigger and better projects, which could have given us at least one major historical game with supporting expansions by now. But if Saga has to go on, then CA really needs to change things up, and this is how they can do it. First of all, Total War Saga titles were allegedly not supposed to be revolutionary new titles or offer new time periods. And yet, that is exactly what Saga titles should be doing. Imagine how awesome Saga titles would be if they actually tried something completely new. Imagine Saga titles experimenting with time periods we've never seen before, which in many ways could gauge the community's interest in various eras and battlefields, and all new ways of playing. In some ways, I guess this is what Troy attempted to do. I'd say it partially succeeded, but it didn't nearly go far enough. I want to see a Saga title that takes place during the Renaissance, the 30 Years' War, the conquest of Constantinople, and the advent of gunpowder. Just more variety overall. I want Saga titles to understand that Total War is not just about unique faction mechanics, but also about universal gameplay features. Because in the end, these deep mechanics, like populations, interesting building systems, supply systems, forts, trade, families, events and decisions, and so much more, are all part of making the turn-to-turn experience that much more engaging. Sadly though, Total War has in the past years focused more on the flashy and arcadey, and even though that's not necessarily bad in itself, these games are not as fun if the depth is removed. And this brings me to my last point, which is that both Saga titles and full-feature titles need a better DLC policy. Personally, I'm a big fan of strategy games being supported for several years, on the condition that the support is worth it of course. And I'm not just talking new factions, I mean innovations that affect the gameplay for every faction. New events, new music, new flavor, technology, systems overall, and aspects that make the game feel just a little bit newer regardless of the faction you're playing. Again, look to the Paradox expansion policy, and you'll get some idea of the innovations I want with every DLC. When Total War Saga was announced, I was hopeful. I really thought it would mean better iterations of the games we had gotten before, hoping we would get detailed games like the campaigns of the Medieval Two Kingdoms expansion, only better. But sadly, the opposite became true, and in 5 years, we've only received 2 titles, which paradoxically is not even that many titles, and makes me feel like we could have had 1 or 2 major historical releases instead. I believe the solution is for Saga titles to end completely and refocus the teams to bigger and better games, or actually rethink what a Saga title can be, giving them much more dedicated attention, better foundations at launch, and a more organized DLC policy to improve the games over time. Because as things stand now, Saga titles have failed as a concept, regardless of how much I personally love Troy. Thank you so much for watching. I really think there's something to the idea of a Saga title, but they're doomed to fail with the current level of attention given to them. Let me know what you think of the Saga concept and my ideas, and if you enjoyed the video, I really hope you leave a like, a comment, consider supporting me on Patreon, and make sure to join on Discord for more. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.